and he's probably spent more time thinking about it. For the rest of us, it's more a question of, okay, we have to shift the way we support, and that's what we need to do.
And what does that shift look like for you?
Well, that's we don't know yet. I mean, there was an order to the years because my mother didn't change very much.
This is the kind of thing the royal institution simply does not tolerate. A man at the very top failing to appear is not normal, not casual, and never ignored. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, gave 70 years of his life to the crown, defined by discipline, loyalty, and strict adherence to duty. He consistently placed responsibility above personal feelings, maintaining a role that demanded constant restraint. Across those decades, he never publicly broke protocol. Not once. So when a figure like him is suddenly absent, it is not a mistake. Within the royal system, absence carries meaning. It communicates something deliberate and unmistakable. Now consider April 9, 2005, the wedding day of Charles III, then the Prince of Wales, a defining personal moment for the future king. Yet Philip was not present at the ceremony. That absence stood out immediately. This was a man known for attending every obligation, state events, official visits, public ceremonies, without fail for decades. For him to step back on such a significant occasion suggested intention rather than oversight. It created a silence that felt louder than participation. At the Windsor Guildhall Registry Office that morning, there was an empty chair where Philip could have been. While Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles signed the legal documents formalizing their marriage, his absence was visible. In a setting where every detail is noticed, that absence carries weight. Originally, the wedding was expected to follow tradition, a grand ceremony in a cathedral, reflecting the scale and importance of a royal marriage. That was the standard expectation, especially for the heir to the throne. But that version never happened. Instead, the event was scaled down into a civil ceremony held in a town hall outside the castle grounds.
We kind of knew what the rhythm of the year was, so things like that will change, and how we are part of the support for the monarchy may change slightly. Who knows?
And when you hear sometimes people refer to a slimmed-down monarchy, I can't imagine what that might mean for a role like yours. I don't know how many more hours in the day you have to take more things on.
Well, I think the slim down was said in a day when there were a few more people around to make that seem like a justifiable.
Right.
Attendance was limited to just 28 guests. There were no cameras inside, no elaborate staging, and no sense of the usual royal spectacle. Two of the most significant seats remained empty. This shift was not minor. The future king restructured one of the most important events of his life. He adjusted the setting, reduced the scale, and stepped away from tradition. The circumstances surrounding that change made it difficult to ignore the role of Philip's absence. What stands out even more is how Philip communicated. He was not known for dramatic confrontations or emotional speeches. He did not publicly challenge decisions through words. Instead, he relied on something far more controlled: presence or absence, attendance or non-attendance. Within the monarchy, these signals carry deep meaning. Every appearance, every position, every absence is observed and interpreted. For someone in Philip's position, these choices functioned as a clear form of communication. Charles understood that. So did everyone else present. The guests in that room did not need an explanation. The situation spoke for itself. The message was conveyed without a single statement being issued. This is where the situation moves beyond simple disagreement. Disapproval within families is usually private. It appears in conversations, tone, or quiet exchanges that remain behind closed doors. What happened here was different. Philip's absence was public. It was visible. It could not be reframed or softened by explanation. By not attending the legal ceremony, he withheld something that carried symbolic importance within the institution. That absence removed a form of acknowledgement that could not easily be replaced. It left a gap that no official narrative could fully fill. At the same time, his presence later at the blessing added another layer. It created a contrast that felt carefully measured, absent from the civil ceremony, present for the religious element. Together, those choices formed a precise statement. The question that follows is difficult but important. Was this an act of principle or an act of personal judgment? The distinction matters because it shapes how the decision is interpreted. Understanding that question also requires looking at Philip's background. He was born into the Greek Orthodox Church and later converted to Anglicanism in order to marry Elizabeth II. While the conversion fulfilled institutional requirements, he later indicated that his original beliefs remained significant to him. Within Orthodox tradition, marriage is considered binding in a way that does not easily allow for remarriage. When remarriage occurs, it is often viewed differently, more as a concession than a full celebration. Charles's previous marriage had ended under intense public scrutiny with lasting consequences. That history remained part of the context.
My role, I have a role as Colonel of the Blues and Rolls in the Household Cavalry Regiment, as Goldstick. And Goldstick was the original close protection officer. So that is a role that I was asked if I'd like to do for this coronation. So I said yes.
Now he intended to marry the woman closely associated with that earlier chapter. From Philip's perspective, this may have shaped how the situation was judged. Biographer Robert Lacey described the broader atmosphere surrounding the decision, noting that palace insiders saw a difference in how Philip and Charles viewed what the monarchy could accept. Their perspectives were not aligned, and that tension appeared in how events unfolded. Another key detail often overlooked is that Elizabeth II was also not present at the Windsor Guildhall that morning. The civil ceremony, where the marriage became legally binding, took place without the monarch in attendance. The explanation given at the time centered on her role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. A civil setting was considered inconsistent with that position. That reasoning addressed her absence, but not Philip's. He did not have the same constitutional limitation. As the Duke of Edinburgh and father of the groom, his absence stood on its own. Two empty chairs, same morning, same moment. There is no clear record suggesting coordination between them. Yet the outcome created a unified visual message without the need for direct communication. In a system built on symbolism, that kind of alignment does not go unnoticed. They had spent 57 years inside the same system, learning how it speaks without ever raising its voice. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and Elizabeth II didn't need to sit down and plan anything. They already understood the rules, the signals, and what each move would mean. As Robert Lacey explains, this was not some secret plot. This was institutional logic playing out exactly how it was designed to. Both of them knew what that registry office represented. Both of them made their decisions based on that understanding. But then something shifted, and it was not Philip's stance. That never changed. What changed was what he believed he could still control. The marriage itself was already locked in. Charles had made his decision, and the Queen had formally approved it at the Privy Council on March 2, 2005. From that point, everything was already moving forward. The civil ceremony was happening no matter what. Philip had already delivered his message by not showing up. The empty chair said everything that needed to be said. The real question became what he would do next. What came next was the blessing at St. George's Chapel. This was a completely different setting. Around 800 guests filled the space. Cameras were present. The Archbishop of Canterbury led the service. It carried the full weight of a public religious ceremony. And inside that ceremony, something very specific took place.
And how they did things. And, the people brought their ponies and horses out, but they not only brought them out, they'd platted them, they were properly dressed, they were well turned out. They brought their tractors out and they parked them, tidily, they're all clean. And if you come from a rural background, I was really impressed. It was just an astonishing sight. But the sheer numbers of people who turned up in a quite extraordinary place.
Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles stood before the congregation and read from the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. They openly acknowledged their past, speaking of manifold sins and wickedness, asking for forgiveness in front of everyone watching. It was not subtle. It was direct, formal, and deeply symbolic. Philip walked into that room and took his seat. He watched it all unfold. He watched his son and Camilla publicly frame their relationship in the language of repentance, something everyone present already understood without it being spoken so directly. His earlier refusal had not turned into approval. It had turned into something more calculated. He stayed away from the moment that made the marriage legal. He attended the moment that placed it under the structure of the church. That distinction mattered. It was sharp, controlled, and intentional. For a man in his 80s to hold that level of precision across a single day says everything about how he operated. That afternoon became one of the clearest signals he ever gave about what he accepted and what he did not. And that brings the story back to the same question. Was that empty chair at Windsor Guildhall an act of principle, or was it something more personal? Was it about protecting the institution, or was it aimed directly at Charles for choices that had created tension for decades? While Philip was sending his message through absence, the Queen was doing something very different. She was using documentation. On February 10, 2005, Clarence House released an announcement that did not get nearly enough attention at the time. It stated that Camilla would not take the title Princess of Wales after marrying Charles. Instead, she would be known as the Duchess of Cornwall. And when Charles eventually became king, the plan was for her to be styled Princess Consort, not Queen. This was not required by law. The government confirmed that clearly. The marriage was not morganatic, and under common law, Camilla would legally become queen once Charles took the throne. So this limitation was not about legality, it was a decision. It was the institution setting boundaries. The formal consent document issued by Elizabeth II under the Royal Marriages Act 1772 carried those conditions within it. The Princess of Wales title, strongly tied to Diana, Princess of Wales, would not pass to Camilla. That line was clearly drawn. This was the Queen's way of communicating, not through public confrontation, but through structured decisions that would shape how Camilla was positioned for years to come. Philip had his absence. The Queen had her terms on paper. Different approaches, but they pointed in the same direction. There is one argument that always comes up here, and it needs to be addressed. Philip was 83 years old in April 2005. Some say his absence from the civil ceremony was simply about age or logistics, a long day, limited energy, nothing more. But that explanation does not hold up under scrutiny. He attended the blessing later that same day, same date, same physical demands. If he was able to be present at St. George's Chapel, then he was able to be present at the registry office. The difference was not capability, it was a choice. And that choice is what carries meaning. Another argument is more subtle. Some people say that by attending the blessing, Philip was ultimately showing support, that his presence there cancels out the earlier absence. But when you look closely, the picture becomes more complex. What emerges is a man who did not back down from positions he had held for years, but also did not escalate conflict unnecessarily. Refusing both events would have been simpler, a complete rejection. He did not do that. Instead, he chose a middle position. He attended the ceremony that aligned with his conditions. He stayed away from the one that did not. That level of control reflects someone who understood exactly how his actions would be interpreted. According to Robert Lacey, this was not about drama. It was about precision. A lifetime of operating within a system where every move had meaning shaped how he handled that day. On April 9, 2005, inside St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, Philip was seated. The Queen was there as well. Earlier that morning, both had been absent from the registry office. Now they were present together, watching the same service unfold. There was no public statement, no confrontation. Just two individuals arriving, through different reasoning, at the same outcome. The civil ceremony took place elsewhere. The blessing happened here. They treated those two moments as fundamentally different, and their actions reflected that distinction. This is not about coordination, it is about convergence. Two people who had spent decades understanding the same system reaching the same conclusion independently. Philip sat there and watched the marriage receive its conditional acceptance through the church. He did not initiate it. He did not fully endorse it. But he defined the limits of his acceptance with a level of clarity that no speech could have matched. That brings the story to a critical point. Was Philip right to attend the blessing, or did that decision give Camilla the recognition she had been waiting for? Because for decades, he had maintained distance from that relationship. The answer to that question shapes how everything that follows is understood. Robert Lacey, who has spent decades documenting the House of Windsor, provides one of the most detailed accounts of this period. His work does not attempt to exaggerate conflict. It presents a structured view of a long-standing difference between Philip and Charles, expressed not through arguments, but through consistent actions over time. He describes two men with fundamentally different views on what the crown could accept, and decisions that reflected those differences in controlled, deliberate ways. Another perspective comes from Penny Jonas, who adds insight into the internal mindset behind these decisions. Her work suggests that the Queen's concerns were not driven by personal dislike, but by institutional impact. The relationship between Charles and Camilla had already caused visible strain on the monarchy. According to her account, both the Queen and Philip initially preferred that Camilla not remain part of Charles's life at all. Christopher Anderson adds another layer to this situation, focusing on the personal side of it all. He describes Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, as a demanding and exacting father, someone whose approach created distance over time. That gap between him and Charles III did not suddenly appear during the Camilla years. It had been there for a long time, but those years pushed it further, turning it into something neither of them could fully repair. For Charles, his father's stance was not just institutional, it felt personal. The message behind that empty chair, the years of silence, the controlled distance, all of it carried weight that stayed in their relationship for decades. It was not something that could be easily dismissed or forgotten. When you look at the work of 3 different biographers, you start to see a pattern. Each one focuses on a different angle, but they all land on the same conclusion. Philip's opposition was steady, deliberate, and expressed through carefully controlled actions. He did not need dramatic speeches. His presence or absence communicated everything. The one moment where his position softened, even slightly, was the blessing. That was the only space where he could stand without fully endorsing or completely rejecting the situation. He chose that middle ground carefully. He could have refused to attend anything at all, but he did not take that path. At the same time, the years leading up to that day carried a very different tone. The atmosphere around Camilla Parker Bowles was shaped by distance and restraint. The lack of warmth from Philip was noticeable. His disapproval was not loud, but it was constant. It followed her into every room, long before she officially became part of the royal family. That environment lasted for decades. Camilla had to navigate it carefully, step by step, for nearly 30 years. Alongside that, Elizabeth II maintained the title restrictions and the formal conditions attached to the marriage for 17 years. These decisions created a structure that the public could understand, even if the deeper reasoning was never openly discussed. One key moment came after the Queen's passing. Charles removed the Princess Consort designation that had been presented back in 2005. The plan that had once been shared with the public did not remain in place. Camilla's position shifted, and the outcome changed. For a long time, she existed in a complicated space. She was part of Charles's life, but not fully accepted in the same way within the institution. She was present, but limited by the framework surrounding her role. That balance defined her position for years. But to understand why Philip acted the way he did, you also have to look at what came before. The history of Charles's first marriage to Diana, Princess of Wales, placed the monarchy in a difficult situation. The choices made during that time created lasting consequences, both publicly and internally. Philip's silence and distance did not appear without context. They were shaped by those earlier events. In that sense, responsibility does not sit in one place. The situation was built over time, through decisions that affected not just individuals, but the institution as a whole. This is where the story becomes more complex than it first appears. It is not simply about someone trying to stop an outcome. The idea that Camilla becoming queen represents a complete defeat of Philip's position does not fully match what he was doing. For 17 years, those terms were visible. The title restrictions, the structured consent, the separation between the civil ceremony and the blessing, all of it formed a system that shaped how Camilla entered the royal family. It was not about closing the door, it was about setting the conditions for walking through it. Philip understood that difference clearly. He did not attempt to prevent the outcome entirely. Instead, he influenced how that outcome would be perceived and structured. The way he communicated remained consistent. He relied on controlled actions rather than public statements. Silence, absence, and selective presence became his tools. They carried meaning that did not need to be explained. That approach lasted as long as he remained part of the institution. His influence stayed in place through those carefully constructed boundaries. Over time, those boundaries shifted, especially after the passing of Elizabeth II. Today, Camilla is queen. The coronation has already taken place. The title that was once restricted is now fully recognized. The institution eventually moved beyond the earlier limits. If someone looks at this story and sees it as a failed attempt to stop something, they are missing a key point. Philip was not focused on stopping it. He was focused on shaping it. The events of April 9, 2005, show that clearly. At Windsor Guildhall, with 28 guests present, Charles and Camilla signed the legal documents that made their marriage official. At that exact moment, the two people whose presence would have carried the most symbolic weight were not there. They were elsewhere, by choice. Later that day, at St. George's Chapel, everything shifted. Around 800 people were present. The ceremony carried the full structure of the Church of England. It was not a full endorsement, but it was a formal acknowledgement. Philip was in that room. In the registry office, his chair remained empty. That contrast is the core of this entire story. It was not about defiance or emotion. It was a deliberate decision about where to stand and where not to stand. He understood exactly what his presence in each space would communicate, and he chose accordingly. The path Camilla followed into the royal family was shaped by those decisions. The blessing, rather than the registry, became the moment of acceptance. The title restrictions and formal conditions defined her role for years. Those choices formed the structure of 2005, and that structure remained in place for a long time. Philip did not lose influence in this situation. He set the terms that guided it for years. That is a different kind of impact. At its core, this story also reflects something more personal. A parent cannot decide for their child. No matter the position, no matter the institution, that limitation remains. Philip had spent decades inside a system defined by rules and expectations. He had given up personal ambitions to support a role that was never fully his. Yet even within that system, there were limits to what he could control. Charles had already made his decision long before the wedding day arrived. That outcome was set in motion well before April 2005. Philip recognized that. So he focused on the only thing he could still influence. Not the decision itself, but what it would cost. The blessing instead of the registry. The titles that would not be used. The conditions attached to the approval that were never loudly discussed but clearly understood within the institution. Those were the choices available to him. He defined the terms, even if he could not change the outcome. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, passed away on April 9, 2021, exactly 16 years after the day he attended that blessing at St. George's Chapel. The date itself stands without interpretation. It does not need added meaning. What remains is the pattern of how he acted. He communicated through what he chose not to say, where he chose not to stand, and what he chose not to formally approve.